our ground rounds talk as part of our Cultural Diversity Day this year. We have Dr. Thompson here with us, and I just want to give a little brief introduction for Dr. Thompson, and then he'll get started. So he is a community and public health psychiatrist based at the Squirrel Hill Medical Center in Pittsburgh. He has focused his career on improving public psychiatric services, developing whole person primary health services, and creating public population health psychiatry with a particular emphasis on achieving health equity and addressing the deaths of despair. From 2007 to 2010, he served as the medical director of the Center for Mental Health Services in the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. While there, he was co-chair of the Federal Work Group on Primary Care and Behavioral Health Integration. From 2010 till 2013, Dr. Thompson was the Chief Medical Officer for Recovery Innovations, a multi-state and internationally known provider of peer and professional recovery-oriented crisis and outpatient services. Today, he and his daughter, Alice Thompson, an incoming psychiatric resident, are working to bring integrated community therapy to the United States through their Visible Hands Collective. Integrated community therapy is both a therapeutic technique and method for mental health promotion developed in the favelas of Brazil, where people gather to share experiences, learn from each other, and address emotional suffering in their families and neighborhoods. He believes integrated community therapy can help people connect through shared struggle to create community and support one another through large-scale issues such as deindustrialization and climate change. Dr. Thompson, I'll let you go on from there, and I believe you should have the ability to share your screen if you need to do so. It should be on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. Dr. Thompson, you're muted now.
How many times have I heard that in the last 2 years? Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be here talking with you. I'm hoping that my dog, who has just gotten set off, is not too distracting. I will, if it's really a problem, just let me know. Tripti, you can tell me. Just Dr. Thompson, the dog is really annoying. Try to make him quiet. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm going to see if I can share my screen right now. Here we go. Okay. Hopefully that shows up, and I am going to, let's see if I go to play. Will that let me go to play? Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, that's working perfectly.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm here to talk about solidarity care and U.S. psychiatry. I originally written American psychiatry, and then I realized that that's actually a little bit presumptuous and sort of a little bit against the message here, which is that there are developments that are going on around the world, particularly in the global South, that may be of real value and interest to us in the United States to consider. And I want to try to make the case for this notion of integrative community therapy, which I'm going to describe in some detail as we go forward. But before I do, I want to just point out one other element of this screen here, and that is that you'll see a circle of people. That is an image of a session, or what they call a round of integrated community therapy occurring in a favela in Brazil. And I want you to note the spider web that's in the middle. That's the symbol of the work that's going on in Brazil. I will show you the symbol that we're adapting in the United States later, but the notion of the web of connection is a really critical piece, and I wanted to just make sure that that was evident. I am going to just take 1 second and see if I can get my dog to be quiet and allow me to focus. Just hang on. I apologize for this. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come on. Come on.
If anyone needs to go grab a sip of water in this moment, feel free to.
Okay, I apologize for that. I'm just going to show you an element of basic dog psychology. Have treats available. So Hopefully that will buy some silence. It's a puppy, so I can't really completely control it. All right, so integrative community therapy, what is it? In the time we've got together here, I want to talk a little bit about the history of ICT and its link to collective trauma, and how necessity can be the mother of invention. It isn't always. And then I want to talk a little bit about the practice of ICT, and then some reflections on this notion of solidarity, care, mutual aid, and how we might bring this into the Anglophone world. So the first thing I want to point out is ICT exists in large measure because of what's happening in northeastern Brazil. Folks may be aware that the Amazon jungle has essentially been cut back over the years, and this is unfortunately a current policy of the government in Brazil to continue to do that. So the desertification of Brazil has been apace, and that means that this is the northeastern corner of Brazil. The northeastern corner of Brazil has really become a desert. It used to be jungle, and now it is a desert. And the people who are living there have had to move, and large numbers of them have moved to the cities throughout Brazil, but particularly in the northeast. In the city of Fortaleza, which is in the state of Ceará, which is on the corner of northeastern Brazil, the Pirambu favela materialized essentially because people were having to depart these interior places that they were living, farming, living off the land. When the desert occurred, when the desertification occurred, they had to split, and they end up coming to the cities, and they come to the favelas, the famous term for Brazilian, basically what we would call slum, ghetto, or shanty town, basically encampments. And people would live in shacks, in cardboard boxes, in just a whole mishmash of efforts to find a way to have some shelter. The challenge would be that this would usually be on land that they didn't own, that was owned by somebody else or the city. And the routine happenstance would be that the police and the military would come in and essentially knock down all of the housing, and the people were constantly under threat. At that point, when this first was really going on in the 1970s and 1980s in Fortaleza, in the Pirambu favela, there was a human rights lawyer who happened to have a brother who was a psychiatrist. So the human rights lawyer, who's working with these communities to try to help protect them from the ravages of the police, comes in and says, I've got a brother. He's a psychiatrist. I'm going to invite him to come to the favela to see what he can do, because there was obviously a lot of trauma, a lot of challenges that people were facing on a day-to-day basis. So that led to Adalberto Barreto, who's a psychiatrist and the brother that I'm mentioning, to come to the favela. And this is his story. I'm going to just, let me see if I have any capacity to move anything around here. I guess I don't. The origin story is that he came to the Pirambu favela in a community called Quatro Varas, with students from the Federal University of Ceará. A lady told us that she couldn't sleep, and she asked for medications. She said she couldn't afford. She was having trouble sleeping. She couldn't afford medications. She didn't even have money to feed her children, let alone to buy medicines. And he realized, Dr. Barreto realized, that he was acting in a way that he used to act in the hospital, but that he really couldn't act in this particular favela. So then she began to tell her story, and the story was that her husband had been murdered in front of her, and she'd been having very significant trouble sleeping since then. And as she told this story, she started to cry. People around her, this was done in a kind of open space, people around her noticed and started to minister to her, to attend to her, to bring her tea, to massage her feet, to rub her back. They came around, and what Dr. Barreto says is that his moment of insight was that he realized that while she couldn't get medication, she could get support and meaningful help from the people around her, and that the people around her had resources that were of utility, that could be taken by the woman and utilized for her own healing, but that in addition, that doing this was helping to heal the other members of the community. And it was at that point that he realized that while the people carried lots of problems, they also carried their own solutions. And that was the moment where this idea of integrative community therapy, a space that was created for that pain and that collective suffering to be shared with the possibility of solutions and support at the same time. So that is the notion of it. I'm going to stand up one more time and let my dog out. Hang on. So what is integrative community therapy? It's a large group dialogic therapy that fosters connection, emotional solidarity, and emotional literacy. It's in use across Latin America and now has spread into Africa, Asia, and Europe. The method derives its conceptual basis from the work of Paulo Freire. I don't know how many people are familiar with the work of Paulo Freire. He wrote a book in the 1970s called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And his approach to treatment, let me back up. His approach to treatment or to education was that there really isn't a teacher and a student, but that students and teachers are all mutually related to each other as teacher and student. So the teacher sometimes is a student, sometimes the student is the teacher, and it's in the sharing of knowledge that that education actually occurs. He also invented the concept or named the concept of conscientization, which is this notion that in order for people to learn, particularly for adults, it's really critical that they learn it in the context of their day-to-day lives. That the way that the world works and operates around people is the thing that motivates people to get an education and to learn. So this model, his method, was used to basically throughout the Global South in literacy campaigns, so that people would get into groups of adults who would spend time talking about the circumstances and the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. And in the context of that, the power of the written language would become material. The way we're doing it with ICT is that emotional literacy actually occurs in the context of people's day-to-day lives. And I'll come to that later on. Other aspects of theory that are really important include cultural anthropology and recognizing the particular kind of rituals and rhythms and approaches of each culture to addressing challenges that people have in their day-to-day lives. It's also based on notions of what supports and promotes resiliency. It has a large measure of input from really conceptualizing human emotions as the sort of building block of human relations, that it is the expression of human feeling and the sharing of human emotions that is the bond that gets established between human beings, that makes it possible for human beings to associate and to work together collectively. It's built on the notion of systems theory, that if you make a change in one aspect of a system, you're changing larger or other elements of a system, that things are all interrelated, similarly reflecting the notions of complexity theory and communication theory. So it's a lot of effort to understand how, in people feeling and talking about their feelings, that impacts on their capacities to manage the challenges that they have in their lives, and the community's capacity to deal with the kinds of challenges that the community faces. Just to give you some basic background, as I mentioned, Adalberto went into the favela. This actually happened in 1986. The ICT participant outcomes are driven through this community-based and community building sessions. The sessions are 90 minutes long. They occur at any point during a week, and they occur in public spaces. In Brazil right now, there are 40,000 trained facilitators. Most of these facilitators are not credentialed professionals. They are lay people. So people who are similar to peer supports in the United States, people who become ICT facilitators are people who, right now, a large number of them are called community health workers in Brazil, but they could be people who work in community-based organizations. They can be therapists, they can be psychiatrists, but for the most part, it's people who are actually in community and part of a community. We now have ICT activity in 31 countries throughout Latin America, into Asia, Africa, and Europe, with the exception of the Anglophone countries. This effort by the Visible Hands Collaborative, which is the initiative I'm leading here to bring ICT to the US, is really the first effort that's been made to bring ICT to any Anglophone country. It has been sort of walled off by Portuguese and the standards and methods that the Global South is sort of warded off from getting into the United States. This is an example of ICT up in the upper left-hand corner. You'll see that an ICT session can have anywhere from 5 to, they tell me that the largest one they've done was around 800. But generally they're in the realm of anywhere from 40 to up to 100 people. But they are also now, because of COVID and because of technology, we've moved into being able to do these on Zoom. So you'll see an example of a Zoom-based ICT. And just a week ago, Dr. Adalberto was here in the United States, and I participated with him in 2 ICTs that he ran on Zoom. One of them was with people in Brazil, and one of them was with people in Ukraine. So it's the Zoom-based technology has really sort of changed and increased the capacity for this method to be used in a variety of settings. An important aspect of ICT, and particularly coming from the Brazilian perspective, is that it's very much involved with communicating between the mind and body. So throughout an ICT session and around the whole concept of ICT is the idea that how you use your body is very important. And people during an ICT are encouraged to actually get up and move around, to do some exercising, to be conscious of their bodies and to use them. The Brazilian saying related to this is that when the mouth is silent, the body speaks, and when the mouth talks, the body heals. So part of the presumption here is that a lot of stress and strain that people carry is held in their bodies in various ways, and that ICT, as is common with other forms of therapy, may actually be helpful in helping people discharge some of the emotional energy in a way that allows them to take some of the tension off of their bodies. Another element that's important to keep in mind here is that the ICT is built around the challenges that people face emotionally on a day-to-day basis. It's not necessarily geared towards, mountain shaking, deep dark secrets, but it is related to deep feelings that people have about challenges that they have on a day-to-day basis. And they in an ITC session, we will talk about the notion of what people's pebbles, what the suffering is that they're holding. And the idea of a pebble is that it doesn't have to be earth-shattering as a stress. It can be more something like, as this quote from Muhammad Ali suggests, it isn't the mountains ahead to climb that wear you out, it's the pebble in your shoe. So we encourage people to talk about the pebble in their shoe, the things that are wearing at them, that are making their emotional lives challenging, that are occurring. It could be in their family, it could be at work, it could be at school. It can be a whole range of various kinds of things that people are challenged with. And I've just been joined by Viteria Figueroa, who's a ICT. She's in the room here with me, and she may periodically contribute a thought, since she's been doing this for many more years than I have. When we do an ICT, a couple things that are really important is that it is essential that people are made to feel welcome, and that there are very clear rules about how we interact. The most important rule in an ICT is that it comes on, that when you speak from your I, from your own self, from your own experience. So similar to other groups, we really have a focus on people talking about what they are expert about, which is themselves. We don't facilitate or have folks giving advice or making judgments or doing interpretations. So in many ways, this differentiates it from some forms of therapy or from some forms of group work. And that the goal is to be silent and listen, and to share when you are motivated to share. And that at times when it makes sense in your own emotional life and in the culture, people are encouraged to share songs, poems, jokes, works of art, anything that comes up that in some ways captures the moment in a culturally appropriate fashion, is encouraged to happen. So so the way that a standard ICT works, as I said, they're conducted in public places. And the idea here is that we are kind of moving away from the idea, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, that all emotional pain should be sequestered into private space. What we actually are encouraging is that emotional pain that is not immediately shameful, and I'll talk about that in a second, that emotional pain that people can share is best actually shared in public. So we encourage people to be in public spaces, and the ICTs are conducted. They can be conducted in a park. They can be conducted in a church basement. They can be conducted in a primary health center, conference room. They can be conducted in any kind of community-based organization in a public setting, with the idea that that public emotions and discussion of emotions is not shameful in itself, and that actually doing this is part of what builds community and what builds bonds and relationships. And that's a little twist on the general way our culture approaches stuff, and is obviously part of the challenge of figuring out how to bring this cultural change to the United States. When people come to an ICT, they are welcomed. This is really important part. I mean, it's not unusual in any kind of therapy that you want people to feel accepted and welcome. In ICT, it's critically important that people feel that they are in a space where their participation is taken as a gift, and that their capacity to feel that they are part of and linked to other people is really important. One of the ways that we do that, in addition to just going through the rules that I talked a little bit about and sort of welcoming people in general, is that we ask people to share any good news or celebrations or things that are happening in their life that are going on. And this is it's a ritual part of the ICT, but it's really an important part because people have an opportunity to start off on the foot of where things are going right, what parts of life are in the right direction, and to share some of that with other people. Then what happens is that we shift to collecting the pebble that people have. So we ask people to talk about what is the thing that's in your shoe, what's happening to you in your life now that you would like to share with this group, to have them reflect on. And we ask people to speak about those challenges. We will say to people that we're not asking them to share secrets that they don't want other people to know. So we're not running this like a HIPAA, fortified effort to make sure that nothing leaks out of the groups. So we say to people, we're not asking you to talk about stuff that you don't want other people to know about. We do want you to talk about stuff that you're comfortable sharing. And in some groups, obviously, that have sort of shared traumas or shame-based feelings, you can talk about things that would be more secret. But that's in the context of groups where there is a specific awareness that there will be a discussion of things that are really more challenging, and in settings where the group itself is ready and can handle that kind of challenge. So what happens is that we usually collect 4 or 5 challenges that people are dealing with. I'm having trouble getting along with my husband. I'm having difficulty with my child. I'm really stressed at work. We've got deadlines. They're overworking us, all those kinds of things that people live and go through. And we asked for people to share a challenge. And then what we do is summarize each challenge and try to universalize it. We ask people to reflect if anybody in the group has any resonance with any of the challenges that people are having, any of the sufferings that people are expressing. So we collect a few people talking about, yes, what Joe said about work really resonates with me. I'm under a similar kind of challenge, feeling sped up and under pressure. And we collect a couple of those. And then what we ask people to do is to vote on which of the challenges or the sufferings or the pebble the group is going to talk about as a theme. And the reason we do this is, one, it helps focus the group, but it also makes sure that there is a capacity within the group to actually reflect on the theme that is influencing or impacting the most number of people in the group. So we're asking people not to vote for the person who's put up the theme. What we're asking them to vote for is, which of these themes resonates with you the most? Okay. And that's the thing we want. We want to talk about the theme that resonates with the most people. And usually what people will say afterwards is that, it wasn't my first choice if they didn't vote for that theme, but it still resonated with me in some way, because we try to universalize these in various different kinds of ways. So the vote is held. And then what happens is that we have a conversation. The facilitator will have a conversation that's relatively brief with the person whose theme has been chosen, whose pebble has been chosen, just to kind of put it in context. And some other people are encouraged to ask some questions if they need to have something clarified about the concern. And then the facilitator then talks about what the broadened, the sort of universal aspect of this particular challenge is. So somebody might have lost a loved one, somebody's died. Grief is a universal challenge, but even beyond grief is the fact that people can lose people and things in many different ways, not just from death. And the universal sort of approach is to say, has anybody else in this room, do they resonate with the theme of having lost something that was very important to them, and they now have to figure out how they're going to put their lives back together again? And if you resonate with that, can you not only talk about what happened to you, but what you've done to overcome that challenge? How have you managed to live on despite that? And people then will, in the group, start to talk about how the theme resonates with their own lives and what they've done to overcome that particular challenge. As you can see, this is all very, tightly linked together. People do this sharing and their ways of overcoming. And then at the end of it, after everybody's finished saying what they're going to say, the group is asked to stand up, to make actual physical contact with each other when it's done in a physical space. And when we're in a box, we will, in a box on Zoom like we are right now, we will reach out, and it's still really a challenge for me to figure out how to do this, how to touch the other person symbolically on the screen. So you can all try to do that right now if you want to. It's a little harder than it looks. And we at that point recognize that in being together and in sharing the sufferings that we've heard, and in sharing the solutions that we've heard, we have increased our capacity both individually and as a group to manage the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. And we ask people to share what they've learned in that process. Is there something that somebody said, some poem that was read, some insight that they got from somebody else that was particularly impressive to them? And they will share that and name the person who's been involved, who helped them get to that point. I should mention, I neglected to, when we do this process of resonating on the theme, the person who presented the theme, whose theme it was, is asked to actually step out of further conversation and to just listen. We're not trying to run this as a group therapy session for one person. We're running this as a group session of sharing for everybody in the room. So the person who's got the theme the goal isn't to solve their problem so much as it is to give them an opportunity to hear a variety of solutions, but more importantly, for the whole room, the whole group of people to practice and experience sharing similar emotional challenges and how they've overcome them. So that's how an ICT group runs. It usually takes 90 minutes to 75 to 90 minutes. We can, on certain circumstances, run what's called a thematic, where the facilitators will, pose a question for everybody to reflect on about their emotional experiences. And that often happens when there's really something that's very particularly showing up in the news or in the common culture at that time, so talking about people's feelings about the war in Ukraine, or dealing with climate change, or dealing with another police shooting, and how they're overcoming the challenge of managing the feelings that they're having in relation to those challenges. That can be done. So the general way of doing it by collecting themes and pebbles is in some circumstances can be shifted to this more sort of focused approach that I just mentioned as a kind of thematic. So that is what an ICT is. What we found is that, in Brazil, the way it's set up right now is that ICT is part of the Brazilian Health Service, and somebody will go into a primary health setting, and if they are noted to have some mental health or emotional challenge that they're facing, they will be referred to the ICT groups that are occurring in the community, in their favela or in their city, and asked to go attend those. People do attend these. As I mentioned, the Brazilian government now is funding close to 40,000 facilitators across the country who are running these things on referrals from the primary health services. What they find is that about 87% as a number who go to an ICT report that their initial challenge, their emotional challenge that they've faced, has been addressed sufficiently that it's resolved. And that means that 13% are going to require further aid or help beyond an ICT. and folks are reporting that they feel increased capacity to self-regulate their emotions. And we find that there is to some degree a dose effect. So if people attend 4 or more ICTs, we see a more dramatic reduction in their challenges. So we have some input, some output research or outcome research that demonstrates some utility at the individual level. I would say we have a fair amount of evidence from a variety of populations that the findings that I've just been describing kind of work for, for men, for women, for older folks, for younger folks, for folks in a variety of different particular settings. So, we're confident that it at least has some validity in terms of being useful to people. Of course, it's coming out of the global south. We don't have an NIMH in Brazil that has done randomized control trials, nor do we have yet in the United States a clear way of assessing how a therapeutic intervention at the community level would be measured and assessed. That's something that we're still kind of on the frontier of. So even at the level of one of its primary outcomes, we're not 100% sure about how that would be measured. The Brazilians will tell us that the ICT is a very good way to help a community find an emotional core that allows people to work together and solve common problems, as well as to manage the challenges that they have that they bring to the ICT. And an example of that, the favela that that this work has been largely carried out in, although it's not the only favela, the first favela, which I mentioned was a shanty town that was being routinely knocked down and torn apart, is now actually a bricks and mortar community that has a park in it, that people who in the past would never have gone to a favela will routinely go to, because it's got a variety of cultural offerings and resources that other communities don't have. And at least part of that may be attributable to the fact that ICT has been an ongoing feature of the life there. So the primary benefits of ICT are community building, promoting a place for shared suffering, and providing for spaces of inclusion and diversity, and promoting healthy coping strategies, and creating community networks. I should mention one other thing. When a ICT is finished, at the beginning of an ICT, we will announce to people, if you still have an issue or a concern that exists, and after the ICT, we will stick around as facilitators to connect you with any kind of resource that hasn't been adequately addressed in the ICT itself. So we are aware that there will be people who are going to come in who have issues that may not be resolved in an ICT. It's not a panacea by any means, and that one of the key things that an ICT does is also make sure that people get referral on to other resources. So we're not. I don't want anybody to say that we're touting this as a way to solve all problems. We don't think that, but we do think that it's a way to tap into and reduce the number of challenges that communities have by taking advantage of the resources that the communities are themselves able to mobilize. So now I just want to talk a little bit about solidarity care, which is the Brazilian term for ICT, and related efforts to build the capacity of communities based on the capacity that is within communities, and to use the emotional resources that people have to bring those to essentially to unleash them in such a way that they become useful to the whole community and to individuals in the community through the ICT. Issues that I think are strange to talk about in American medicine. We don't talk about solidarity, and the idea that solidarity is a useful thing for people to feel connected and to feel that they have a relationship with other people in the shared space in the communities that they occupy. So that idea of solidarity as being something healthy and healing is an idea that I think we're kind of coming to a little bit through the notion of peers and peer supports. Um, and we've had maybe a little bit of a notion through groups, although most American group therapy is done, in that same kind of small privatized way. And by privatized, I mean, it's not a public display. It's not a public connection. It's a private connection that usually happens in most groups. The notion of emotional literacy, I think in the United States, we are very, very ambivalent about this idea that you should be able to talk about your emotions in some way and have language for it and have a way of understanding and listening and empathizing with other people. The challenge of bringing a concept like emotional literacy to a society where that's and maybe an ambivalent goal, I think you can potentially appreciate. This idea of care, an interesting thing, and we're doing this in the United States, but we're also ambivalent about it. We like to have our care professionalized, but we really demand a lot of people in their own social networks to find care from other people who are not professionalized. So one of the things that ICT really builds on is this notion that, and Solidarity builds on, is the notion that people really are capable of caring for each other. But and an interesting element of the ICT, in caring for other people, there is an importance on making sure that you care for yourself. So one of the big challenges for therapists who do ICT and facilitators, for psychiatrists who do ICT, is that you have to begin the whole idea with the concept that you are at the ICT that you're participating in and facilitating, not to help other people. You are not there to help other people. You are not a savior. You're not coming in as a person who's going to make the interpretation. You're not going to give the advice. You're not going to be there as the person who's going to change the other. You are there because ICT is good for you. It helps you talk about your own emotions. It helps you feel and connect with other people. It is a totally radical decentering of the idea of the professional. And I stress that because it's true, and also because it's really hard for psychiatrists and people who are living in this world of professionalization to imagine that their role in this isn't in their professional role, but in their role as a human being with other people. So the structure is built in such a way that it is about human beings communicating with each other, not with professionals and service recipients. Another element that I also want to talk about, which has really kind of become important recently, and it's a term that I want to introduce back into the conversation. It was present in the 1970s and 80s when Paulo Freire was doing a lot of his work, and that is this notion of conscientization. This is the idea, a lot of you have probably heard of this notion of the social determinants of mental health. So let's call social determinants of mental health, dot two. Dot one was conscientization, and that was the recognition that people's lives and the context in which they live their lives, the actions and processes of becoming aware of the political and social structures around us, or the social dynamics around us, that these are the precursors to really understanding, anybody's life and the emotions that they have. And that this notion of conscientization is something that I think we're trying to carry out in the field of psychiatry right now, is to bring us back to the idea that, in fact, the political and social world really does shape the world that we live in. And ICT recognizes that in the fact that the pebbles that people bring and the challenges that they bring are the challenges that the world shapes and imposes on them. So that's an element of the sort of change that has to happen to bring ICT into the United States. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why we need ICT in the United States. And I could say even before where we are right now, we needed ICT for lots of reasons, but I'm going to use the moment that we're currently in to really highlight that. And if you go around the circle here of pictures, what you're going to see is in the top left-hand corner are caskets getting ready for COVID deaths. Below that is a beautiful image of exactly what is causing global climate change. Below that is obviously George Floyd and the circumstances we have with race relationships and particularly police killings. In the middle on the top is a remnant of one of the steel mills here in Pittsburgh, and is an emblematic of the very radical economic changes that have swept through this country in the last 30, 40 years. And as reflected in the book cover, The Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism, which notes that we've seen a really significant increase in deaths in younger people, which has led to a decrease of the lifespan. Now not just among the white working class, but also Black and Latino working class as well. The picture in the just to the right of the Deaths of Despair on the top there is abandoned houses in Pittsburgh. So the continued urban crisis and particularly housing crisis that we're experiencing. Below that are Ukrainian refugees, and up to the right upper right-hand corner are refugees from Bhutan. So the world being in migratory flux, and the challenges that people of forced displacement, I think, are really apparent. There's obviously an emblem, the travesty of a Confederate flag flying in the Capitol on January 6th. And then lastly, just a mile from my house, that's a picture of the synagogue where 11 people were shot in the largest act of anti-Semitism and violence in the United States in history. All these things are going on, and there's more than just this. All these traumas are happening to us, and we're experiencing them in various different kinds of ways. So why ICT now? And I'm going to suggest that we have a crisis, that world order that we've lived under of what I'm going to call neoliberalism has really is coming to some kind of juncture. Exactly what will happen, we none of us obviously know, but we are, and we've long been a country of individualism. The last 30 years, we've actually seen it ramp up and become even more hyper individualistic, increasing loneliness, isolation, and the notion of precarity, a term also that's used a lot in Europe, and I think would be usefully introduced into the United States. That's a notion that people really are constantly living with some threat to their capacity to continue forward. So precariousness is a state of being that the state and its support of market fundamentalism and profiteering have really torn at our social structures, with growing inequity and austerity, destruction of labor power, and particularly the destruction of the commons and solidarity as a general feeling that people have a connection to each other. And that has led, I think, to the rise of the racist right, to nativism, and to an increased kind of social callousness. People really can feel like they don't care much about what happens to other people. COVID as a solvent of social connections has just really piled on to all of that. So we are a society in duress. You probably have all read that we are in a crisis of mental health. That's presented as though, what's happened is that there are a lot of individuals who are having emotional challenges and struggles. It doesn't really capture, I think, in the way that we talk about it, that we're in a national crisis of how people can make a living and support themselves and imagine a future. It's a bigger crisis than just identifying it as emotional crisis in individuals. It's actually a national crisis in sort of the morale of the people. And I would argue that in some ways, it could be heralding the death of the human and of subjectivity. And just to give a little flavor for that, some of you may remember this. The movie, The Never Ending Story, which is essentially a story of a young boy and his imagination, and his fight against the idea that that there is a nothingness out there that will consume everything unless we exercise our imaginations and our heart. If you've never seen this movie, and I imagine looking at most of you, you look like you're the age of my kids, and there's no way that I didn't watch this movie many times. It's among the movies that I got to watch many times. But I think it's a really interesting reflection of the idea, sort of the spokesperson of neoliberalism, and that may be a term that you guys are not familiar with, but I want to encourage you to look into it because it has set the social gestalt. Margaret Thatcher's famous statement, which is summarized as TINA, there is no such thing as society. It's just individuals. That theory, that way of approaching life, I think, is coming to a point of bankruptcy. However, we are continuing to see reactions to it. And the struggle against the nothingness is exactly what ICT is trying to do. So where does that leave us? I'm going to end just very shortly. Clinical care, the kind of care that all of us have been trained to do, which I think is really important and very useful, unfortunately, is not very useful against the nothingness. It's not very useful against collective trauma. It's not very useful when you're trying to mobilize the capacities of people to mutually support each other. In fact, clinical care could be argued to be an element of the hyper-individualism that we've been pursuing historically. It may actually get in the way of developing the kind of collective capacity for shared emotion and emotional solidarity. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't be doing clinical care. I'm just arguing that we may need to think about how we expand that idea and build it up so that we can tap into resources that we currently can't tap into. And I want to argue that we really don't have any choice. Necessity is driving us. That doesn't mean we will innovate. Remember, I said innovation can be driven by necessity, but it isn't always. Sometimes we just don't innovate. And the question is going to be, can we innovate now? We are working through Visible Hands Collaborative as an effort as a nonprofit with some funding from the JPB Foundation to bring the idea of ICT to the United States, to start to help people understand this approach and begin to innovate on ways to build on this approach and maybe other approaches that tap into the resources of our collective communities and humanity and our shared emotions and our shared ability to communicate. We are working to train people in doing ICT. We're hoping to train people to train people. Right now, everybody who's a trainer of ICT comes from the global South, and in particular, Brazil and Mexico. And we are trying to develop various ways of building this resource into a wide range of settings, like primary health settings, community-based organizations, church basements, even potentially into businesses, organizations, schools, etc. So that's where we're hoping that this kind of approach will grow, and we will see about that. And I'll end with this. This is a saying by the Tremblay Indians tribe in Brazil. A spider without their web is like an Indian without their land, or a community without solidarity. And I'll stop there. And I hope we have a moment or two for questions. I'm sorry I went on so long.
No, this was perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. I've been to one of your ICTs, and it's a really great experience. And I hope to be able to go to more of the ones that you've been posting in the community psychiatry group. We have actually just over 15 minutes for questions. So if I see Dr. Rockbeisel, you raised your hand. If anyone has a question, comment, anything they want to say, feel free to unmute and go ahead and say it, or throw it in the chat and I can read it out loud.
Great, thank you, Dr. Thompson. I'm Jill Rockbeisel, the chair of the Department of Psychiatry, and I want to thank you for this inspiring presentation. It's really impressive, and the entire time you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking about, here we are in Baltimore. We have a huge community in the city that is struggling with so many of the same issues that you highlighted. I really see this as an opportunity for the University of Maryland Department of Psychiatry to take a lead, and maybe to reach out in a different kind of way. Very, very impressive. And I look forward to more information around the training aspect so that we might be able to take a step forward. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I have to say, you know, one of my dreams is in particular is to, and this will betray a couple of my passions. One of them is to get the cities of the AFC North, that is Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, and the Ravens, and
Bengals, the Steelers.
You got it. To get those four cities that are rivals much of the year to figure out how to take our post-industrial circumstances and our industrial heritage and bring ourselves together in a way that actually builds community and makes us better fans. So
it's a great idea.
So something to think about with you guys, because Baltimore's got a clear place in my heart, and well, in an unusual way. But
you'll appreciate this. I am a Pittsburgher. I'm from Pittsburgh, but I've been living in Baltimore, and lots of similarities between our cities.
Yes. All right. Well, that even makes it more compelling. So there. Thank you. We'll have to be in touch on this. I see another question. Couple questions.
There's really quickly a question in the chat just about slides being available. Dr. Thompson, if you wanted to email them to either Isabel or I, if you were comfortable sharing them, we can.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Okay, we can make sure they go on to the appropriate people to share with the department at large. And then
this is actually something that's really important that I want to say about this. So I'm sharing this. One of the things that's really unusual about this is coming from the global South, and it's coming from a space of heart. ICT is free to participants in Brazil, and we are going to keep it free to participants in the United States. We don't want this to be a charged service. We want this to be a service that is free, and we locate it in community, and we figure out how to do that. Related to that is we are not branding this in any way that is going to make money to, as you've seen with many other kinds of forms of therapy. We're not going to do that. We are going to try to figure out how to support the distribution of knowledge about ICT and solidarity care, but it is not ever going to be a profit making or a center of activity that's an initiative. And so sharing this slideshow with anybody, if you get this slideshow and you want to share it with somebody else, please do. Okay. Next question. I got David.
Yeah, David, I see you with your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Very impressive. Before I ask my question, let me point out that there's an advantage in a capitalist economy of trademarking or otherwise protecting legally your brand name and so on. It keeps other people from ripping it off and copying it for purposes against what you want. You can still let people use it for free, but at least you then control how it's used.
Yes, thank you.
And
Good.
There are nonprofits that do that.
And we anticipate doing that. We had actually just discussed that this morning. So but I appreciate you reminding me.
Right. So my real question or thought is listening to you. Excellent presentation, by the way. Thank you. A lot of your concepts, principles, and even examples reminded me of labor organizing and community organizing. As you said, broadening it from the individual mental health. So one question is, what does the facilitator do when I think inevitably, especially in a place like Brazil, which has a presidential election coming up, what happens when those kinds of issues come up in the group, in the meeting? Do you do you run with them, which leads to my second question, which is then how do you anticipate dealing with political opposition or other kinds of opposition? And I think there's something happening right now in Florida, for example, or right-wing circles in general, introducing, mindfulness, paying attention to your emotions, emotional literacy, which educational psychologists tell me actually enhances learning, is being attacked as an infringement. So I expect you'll see that same kind of opposition in the adult world. So what's your plan for dealing with that in the US?
So the answer to the question is that, I hadn't really appreciated how much Brazil is mirroring the United States and we mirror them. We as settler colonial states, and terrible histories in terms of slavery and oppression of indigenous folks and of labor. We unfortunately share a lot in common with Brazil, and the politics even now are, they haven't moved on from Bolsonaro yet, so they're still in that place. The way it's dealt with, and ICT this has really been an important element of my education and relative to ICT, is that ICT really is about the feelings that people have about the things that are happening in their day-to-day lives, about their own lived experience. And the issue of politics, you can talk about the challenges that you have, and you might refer to them in some way about how politics is impacting on your life. But the idea that you would start to be in a position to talk about the politics and, what you're going to do with the politics or what you think other people ought to do with the politics, facilitators will very quickly remind you that what we're here to talk about is your personal emotional experience, and not to talk about politics or to give advice or to, give lectures or any kind of thing like that. And amazingly, and what we've seen so far in the United States and in Brazil when we've done these, is that people just respect that boundary. It's such a refreshing open space to have an emotional sharing that it just doesn't get trammeled on very much. But it is still something that we're aware of, and I've asked pointed questions in exactly the same way about how do you manage that, because you've certainly got politics in Brazil, and they say this has worked for them. So that's the best answer I can give you at the moment. And the politics of humanness, I think that's a whole other challenge, and I think that solidarity care as a concept clearly has a political element to it, in that it respects and values all human beings and sees that the capacity for human beings to be helpful and supportive of each other is a value that we should cultivate. I don't think that that's necessarily seen as a value by everybody, and therefore I can imagine that it will be a political challenge at some level at some point. But we are a long way away from that at the moment, and we will deal with it as we have to, I think, when we need to. Does that answer anything in the direction you're asking? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Ben.
Hi, Dr. Thompson. Thank you so much for coming. And just for full disclosure, I think I might have met you at a certain holiday in late July in Pittsburgh when Dr. Fox invited me to a certain gathering when I was a student of hers.
It was probably in late January.
Late January, that's what I meant.
Yes, yes.
So,
yes,
anyhow,
you did. Nice to see you.
I'm having my own set of emotions come back as I think about that. But I wanted to ask, as an attending these days, how do you teach seasoned psychiatrists who have been doing things a certain way for a long time how to change their professional role the way you describe? And maybe as a corollary to that, how do you teach psychiatrists or people in our business about emotional literacy when I'm not sure many of us learned what emotions really are in our training. I didn't in Pittsburgh, and I didn't where I went to my own training, which was here. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about those.
Those are great questions, and I have to say, Ben, it alarms me that I'm old enough for you to be in attending for a while, I imagine, already. So it's been a little while since that party in late January,
I'm
but I'm
sorry
glad to
for
see
any
you
trauma
there.
I've caused.
The two things that I want to just reflect on what you've just said. I actually know that in the training that I participated online with Dr. Bejedo, which was the first online training that had ever been done around ICT, and it occurred because of the COVID, obviously, that I was singularly the worst facilitator. I was awful. I could not get this idea that my job was to sort of be out of the way. And I really just kind of wanted to focus on the challenge that the person brought forward and solve that problem. I mean, I felt like I was in an individual therapy session with like 40 people helping me. That's how I approached it. That was dead wrong, dead wrong. So the way that I try to overcome that is one, to be conscious of it, and to really try to pay attention to the goal of not delivering the perfect question that implies an interpretation when I'm asking somebody about the challenge that they have and I'm facilitating, but to try to just be a little bit more just like, an ordinary person, put my mask down and put it over there. Right. And it's not a simple process to do that after you've been doing it as long as I have. However, it's been really useful to me because I realized how much this mask of, the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey, how much the mask of being a psychiatrist has permeated my skin. I don't think I had really grasped how far deep into that I was. And it's been a little bit freeing to say, I have that role. I can take that role in certain circumstances and I can take it off in others. And in this one, it helps me to take it off a little bit. So that was the first part of your question, at least as the best answer to that. The other part of the answer is that Adalberto Bejedo, who I squired him around the city of Pittsburgh and for a week, and then we went around Pennsylvania for a week. Adalberto will say when he's raising a thing that he wants people to think about, he will say, you have to say it 3 times. You have to say it 3 times. You have to say it 3 times, because folks don't listen the first time. They don't listen the second time. Maybe the third time they'll pay attention. And I think that in terms of trying to learn how to be a facilitator and take this other kind of role, if you are a clinician, you actually have to have most of the things said to you 6 times, because the first 3 times you still haven't really gotten it. And everything I've said to you guys, I hope I've been clear enough that it kind of gets through. But if you were me, and thankfully for you, you're not, you would need it 6 times, because it just took a while to get through to me. The thing that's been most compelling to me, and what really got me into this, was that I just knew that I cannot, we need more than the capacity to see individuals one at a time. It's really important that we do that when we do it, but I have waiting lists of, of weeks and weeks. And I know there are people out there who, if they got an intervention, wouldn't ever need to get on a waiting list. So I've been really looking for some way to imagine a public health approach to psychiatry that builds on our capacity to build a human infrastructure of emotional support and connection. And I think that this is a path towards that, or at least one path towards that. How do psychiatry, sort of like the sanitarians built the sewage lines. This is a bad analogy, and I'll probably regret it later, but how do we build the linkages and the supports that support people through hard and difficult times? How do we help people lay the pipe and the relationships and the connections for that, if I can mix a lot of metaphors?
Thank you for that, Dr. Thompson. We, I think, have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the chat before we get on to a couple of awards that we need to present. The first question in the chat is from Dr. Greenblatt. He says he's the medical director of outpatient addiction, outpatient addiction program, and patients identified social isolation as one of their 2 top priorities, the other one being housing. Of course, there's a lot of medical and psychiatric morbidity here as well. Having a model to address this is very compelling, and there are 2 questions. If you could comment on the application to substance use, and then if there are any applications to people living with medical illness as well.
So the answer to those, both those populations is yes. The Brazilians Brazilians are struggling with alcohol and substance use all over the place, and the favelas actually are kind of a key site of that. And they have been using ICT with populations, both of substance users and of people with chronic medical conditions. They also have used them in forensic situations and in schools, in secondary schools and colleges. So they've also used it in older populations, older adults. So our sense is, my sense is that if there's a place for people to share and link with each other, there is a place for something like ICT.
One of the other questions I see in here is from Dr. Ehrenreich, and it's asking if ICT is a one-time intervention or done on a recurring basis in a neighborhood, and if so, how frequently?
So it is not it can be a one-time. People come and go as they see fit. It is really a public entity, and we don't expect people to show up on time necessarily, and we don't expect people to stay to the end. They can, and we hope that they do, but we don't, close the door. We don't limit access. We don't do any of that. So somebody could use it once. Ideally, the best way that it's set up is that it's sort of, it becomes sort of like AA, NA, although this is obviously not targeting a particular form of psychiatric or social suffering. That it's regularized, that you expect it at 1 o'clock in the church plaza, or in the primary health conference room on Tuesdays, and that there is that there are facilitators there, and you can expect to show up. And the goal is, people who've been doing this for a while tell me that for folks who are coming in with a particular challenge, that usually it helps for them to get somewhere between 4 and 6 sessions under their belt over a period of time. But some people continue to use it. My daughter has referred to it as, she's got a useful turn of phrase. She's talked about ICT as being yoga for the emotions, that it's a way for you to live and experience a wide range of emotions and share and talk about them. And that connotes that you could do it on a relatively regular basis as something that's meaningful to you. She also talks about it, and I'll just share this because I think it's a wonderful turn of phrase. She talks about it as being a way to build resilience in people. So we like building as much resilience as we can. Seems like a good idea.
I really like the puns. We don't have much time left. We have 2 questions in the chat. One is about giving an example that illustrates the initiation, implementation concerns with getting ICT started, who you need buy-in from. And then the other one is about the facilitator in ICT having any limitations on their own sharing or self-disclosure as the facilitator. I don't know if you'd be able to comment on any of those just briefly.
I will answer both those right now. The first issue is how do we create a range of practitioners who can do ICT, who have audiences that they can do ICT with, and how do we do that in with the idea that we are not using this as a paid service. This is not a profit-making service. How do we make that happen? How do we take something that's developed in the global South to the global North? How do we use the evidence that we have already as credentials for that transfer? What do we do to build the evidence that we will need to build it into other kinds of spaces and situations? So, for example, how could it become part of the health system, of health services, so that community health workers who are now being created in larger numbers might have ICT as one of the skills that they have to offer to a community, and that they could offer for free because they're getting paid to be community health workers? How could we do that? So that's one. The second question was, just remind me real quickly, Trivett.
About self-disclosure as a facilitator
Oh, yeah.
in ICT.
So as I said, and this is another occasion of, having to say something a third time. When you go to an ICT, if you're a facilitator, you are not going to the ICT to save the group. You're not going to the ICT to be the leader of the group. You are going to the ICT to help them follow the rules and facilitate the structure. You are therefore a participant in the ICT, and the capacity and nobody's required to share their emotions or challenges, but you are fully in a position to resonate to the challenges that other people offer, and to offer your own experience and your own solutions to challenges that resonate with the challenges that other people have. You are a participant, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson.
This was a great thrill. Thank you guys for your interest, and I'm very excited to see your enthusiasm for this. And obviously, if any of you think that this is really crazy, please let me know. Like, what are the sticking points that you feel or hear in this? We are on the beach. That's all we are. We're just on the beach, and we're looking for how and in what ways this may be useful. How do we build American culture into it in a way that helps it propel forward rather than defeats it? And what are the lessons out of this that may be useful to the work that all of us are trying to do to be helpful to the people and communities that we serve?
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, Dr. Thompson, stopping screen sharing, we just have a couple of awards to present before we close for today.
Let me figure out how I do that. Is there a way to get a copy of the chat, by the way?
I am not sure, but I can figure it out while you're closing your screen. I can see if there's a way to print it or something.
I am not getting I'm not getting an arrow, so I can't. Oh, there we go. That helped. Something happened there. Did you unshare it? Did I unshare it?
You took care of it. And I think
did
Isabel is taking care of the chat for us, right, Isabel? I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm just going to take screenshots and transcribe it, and we'll get that to you, Dr. Thompson.
Okay, actually, I can take pictures of it. Can I hang on with you guys for a little while you do your awards?
Absolutely.
Okay, then I'll just be quiet. I'll be quiet.
So I guess I'll introduce the awards and hand it off to you guys to do the faculty award.
That sounds great.
So traditionally, so people know, we give out awards to faculty and residents at CDD. It's called the Rose Memorial Award. And it's in honor of Whitney Holland Rose, who was a second-year resident at our program. Unfortunately, she was tragically killed in 2003. Many of us still remember Whitney. She was very active in her community. She had a spirited love for cultural diversity, showed a sense of compassion for all with whom she came in contact with. It's in her honor that we give the Rose Memorial Award. It's given out to both a psychiatry resident and a psychiatry faculty member who demonstrates tolerance and empathy towards their patients and others, and is dedicated to serving their community and interested in the promotion of cultural humility in psychiatry. So I will turn it over to the CDD chairs who will give the award to the faculty member who's receiving the award this year.
So each year, the Faculty Rose Award goes to a member of our community who inspires our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. When picking a recipient this year, there was an obvious choice. We are so excited to present the award this year to Dr. Kimberly Gordon. Dr. Gordon is the Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship at University of Maryland School of Medicine, diplomat of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and Distinguished Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. After Hurricane Katrina, she completed medical school, residency, and child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at Tulane University School of Medicine, becoming an anti-racist community child and adolescent psychiatrist with expertise in trauma and disasters. A talented educator and national leader, Dr. Gordon has dual appointments at Tulane and University of Maryland as an assistant professor of psychiatry. Her leadership with the APA includes former president of the Caucus of Black Psychiatrists, vice chair of Council on Children, Adolescents, and Their Family, chair of the membership committee, and member of Social Determinants of Health Task Force. Dr. Gordon is also a founder of BHETC LLC, which stands for Bringing Health Equity Training to Communities, with a goal of partnering with systems of care to dismantle racism, increase the lifespan, and achieve health equity and racial justice for BIPOC. Thank you, Dr. Gordon.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to prepare something, but I am floored and receiving this word. When I saw the email, I was a little bit shocked and sort of thought about my childhood pictures of everything that I've experienced in my life to get me to this point. This is definitely a full circle moment for me, and I'm really appreciative of the Cultural Diversity Committee for considering me for this award. I will say that the future is so bright. You guys did a wonderful job. And all the sessions that we saw today was just so delightful. I am extremely proud of you guys and really honored to have worked with these young ladies, Isabella, Tripti, Anne, and Anna. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work. I've always thought about what my indelible mark would be in life. And really, in a few short words, I'd like to tell you that for me, my indelible mark is to manage my voice and facilitate other individuals to find their voice in medicine, find their voice in psychiatry, and find their voice in human connections. I think it's really important that we think about our collective emotional sharing and how that can facilitate some health and wellness for our world and our community. And I want to maintain that when you find your voice, it really inspires others to find theirs. I remember being a resident and medical student and feeling so marginalized and excluded in my training and feeling like if I just finished medical school, if I just finished residency, then I could actually go into my community and do some good. But it was only when I had a mentor or someone who inspired me to use my voice the way I can that I was able to actually affect some change. And I'm very delighted about this and humbled. To be quite honest, this is a year anniversary for me at University of Maryland. I never thought I would be in a position to get an award like this. So thank you so much for this honor.
And if you don't mind, really quickly, Alyssa said she's going to be taking a picture for the CAS Instagram account. So if you don't mind just smiling and looking at camera, she'll take a picture.
Oh, wait, can you talk real quick, Dr. Gordon, just so you pop back up on the screen for me?
Sure. I'm here.
Thank you so much. Congrats, Dr. Gordon.
Thanks.
And I'll pass it back over to Dr. Ehrenreich.
Right, so so congratulations, Dr. Gordon, very well deserved. Before I announce the resident awardee, I want to make again just a comment about what a wonderful day this was, and to thank again all the CDD chairs and the CDD committee, and if we could give them a virtual round of applause for a great job. I also have a couple of the thoughts based on the day today. One is, I think, Anna, as our Jedi chief for next year, there's a lot of things I'm going to be putting on your plate, which we can talk about. And perhaps I'm getting myself in hot water by saying this, but I do think, especially with a lot of the things we heard in the morning, There may be a role for a fourth-year elective with some of these community groups, if we can develop that in some way. So I'd be open to approving that. I'm not sure if Dr. Miller is on the call here, but anyway, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work with them and to expand our connections. So this year's Resident Rose Award goes to someone who's one of our current chairs of our CDD committee, and they helped plan today's event. They've also been somebody who's been involved in past CDDs and planning those as well. And perhaps notably, she started and has run our residency program's Anti-Racist Book Club for the past 2 years. She's very devoted to seeing everyone as an individual and making sure everyone feels welcome. So this year's awardee is Anne-Marie Gustafson. Anne-Marie, still here, still with us?
Yeah, I am. My internet is so shoddy that I jumped off, but I'm on my phone. Thank you so much.
And I will let people know, so Dr. Gordon, if you're still with us, you do get a certificate, which I have for you. Anne-Marie gets a certificate and actually some cash, but as a faculty member, you don't get any cash. So I'll turn it back over to the CDD chairs to wrap up.
All right, so thanks so much for attending this year's Cultural Diversity Day on Community Healing. We hope you've enjoyed learning about different groups in the community, and it will empower you to seek out community partnerships with a lot of these incredible groups. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending and participating.
I just have one last comment, if I'm not frozen, if people can hear me. So I will be, again, I sent this in the other meeting, I will be compiling all the resources that have been graciously shared with us in the chat. So all of the community organizations that we met this morning, once we get the slides from Dr. Thompson, we can attach those as well. Most importantly, there will be as always, post CDD survey asking for feedback. Hopefully I'm not jumping ahead of myself, but with COVID getting less severe, we might be returning to in-person in the future. Hopefully I don't get in trouble with Dr. Ehrenreich for saying that preemptively, but as always, we would love the feedback. So just please fill out that survey when it comes out in the next week or so. That's it. I think we're done now.
Let's grab a picture, Anne-Marie, just say hi real quick and smile. You gotta say hi so that I can see your video.
Oh, my bad. I just smiled.
Thank you, perfect.
Okay, great.